after a church that I loved edged me out of a company that I helped start. I joined the Army, went to war, and this is about that. If you remember from our last part, I had gone through this Baptist college. I didn't really fit in. There was a lot about who I was and what I believed that didn't really jive with what I had been told was correct. I leaned progressive and left politically, and that was forbidden in most of the circles and traditions that I grew up in. You know, how could the political left be actual Christians, right? I was confused that I was attracted to men and women, and I wasn't really allowed to be that way. So I had really pushed that down and never really gave that a second thought. I kind of hunkered down and just put the parts that people would have objected to aside, you know. But even with mental health, I remember hearing from people at this college that I went to, professors and faculty members that I actually looked up to, who would just flat out say that they didn't believe in mental illness, that it was always just sin in your life. And so, like my sexuality and like my politics, even my mental health wasn't allowed in the traditions that I grew up in, at least by some, but enough that it just was unfortunate to hear that this thing that I endured, fighting off the urges to end my life, it apparently was just me screwing up even more, you know? It was just sin in my life, whatever that means. I never really understood why people would weaponize guilt and the presence of sin in that way, as if they were without sin, but you, because you had sin, that's why you were depressed. And so there was just the guilt of feeling guilty, and the guilt of feeling sad, and the guilt of being alone, because obviously I didn't pray enough for a girlfriend, right? And even all that kind of stuff. And if you remember, at the end of my time at that Christian college, I almost got expelled, but then they forgave me. And it was a beautiful gesture. I got my degree and went back up to Michigan to continue on with that film company I was with. But it didn't fix everything, that moment of grace. The depression was still there. The feelings of guilt were still there. I was praying and trying to read my scriptures and all of the normal things. When I moved up to Michigan, I was going to that church that I really loved, but I still felt so out of place. And so within a couple of weeks of me arriving to Michigan, when I sensed that the climate was different and that this company that I helped start was different, and when I finally had the conversation with my friends in that about how the investors, who were also the board of elders at this church that I went to, how they didn't approve of me being hired on. Other people were able to continue with that company, but I was asked to kind of go away. And so it put me at this crossroads. Here I was, a graduate of this university, a sinner yet forgiven, but still feeling the weight of everything, right? Kind of messed up and abandoned by this church that I greatly admired, and left to kind of drift apart from this company that I helped get going. And it was fall turning to winter in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The days got shorter, temperatures got a lot colder, and even the house I was staying in was often empty. And I started to think about, well, what was next for me? And I started thinking more about my family legacy. If you know anything about my family, we've been a military family for generations. Two of my great-grandfathers were in the Army, one during the Spanish-American War, the other during World War I. Both of my grandfathers were in the Navy during World War II. My mom and my dad were in the Navy during Vietnam. And so every generation of my family since the Spanish-American War had served. And growing up, I never felt pressured into joining by my parents. It was always an option, and they were encouraging, like they were encouraging with everything. But now that I was out of college, I didn't feel like I didn't have any other choice, but I really did feel like, well, now's the time to look at maybe doing this military thing. And I tell you, I walked into that office on the 2nd of January, and by the 21st of that same month, I was getting my head shaved in basic training. It was quick. I joined as a combat correspondent, as a print journalist, as a photojournalist. So in basic training, you have what is a microcosm of our country. It's almost like it's like one of those hand-picked stock photos where magically every ethnicity is represented in this group of 10 people that just happen to be sitting around a table. It's kind of like that. In my platoon there were Catholics and Wiccans and Mormons and Hindus and Muslims, and I'm sure there was a Buddhist in there just being chill in the back, right? With this whole life is suffering thing. He had that down pat in basic training. There was a 38-year-old Indian software engineer that wanted to enlist in the military. There was the 36-year-old single mom who was trying to provide for her kids. There was the 18-year-old father of 3, one of whom was 6, one of whom was 4, and one of whom was 2. 18 years old, joining the army to take care of his family. There were former teachers, there were athletes, there were guys that had just been playing PlayStation for the last few years and decided to do something about it. There were atheists, pagans, and there we were, just one big happy family. And as somebody who wasn't sure what his next steps were from a faith perspective, I kind of just shut up and listened. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know how I was going to get through the next day. And I tell you, as I've learned more about discipleship and intentional kind of even Christian religious study, basic training is this amazing crucible that can burn away a lot of ego and arrogance. And while it seems strange to brag about how humble basic training made me, my purpose isn't the bragging, of course, but it's really to convey this idea that even though I had stopped going to church, and even though I didn't really have any desire to join any kind of communities of faith, even though I had kind of walked away from this organized religious aspect of things, basic training and my initial time in the Army, it really taught me a lot about faith, even if I wasn't really that keen on religion. You know? There's a quote attributed to St. Francis of Assisi. We don't know who actually said it. We're pretty sure it's not him. But it's constantly preach the gospel and when necessary use words. And I experienced that kind of thing in basic training. And since I had gone to college, I was a couple of ranks ahead of the people who had just enlisted just off the street. And the drill sergeants noticed the difference in rank. Even though we didn't wear rank on our collars while we were basic trainees, they knew that I'd gone to college, and so it singled me out. In my case, they put me in charge constantly. So I was the constant platoon leader, I was the constant bay leader, I was the constant guy in charge. And it was difficult, and I screwed up a lot. By the end of my time in basic training, I can't tell you how many people walked up to me and was just asking me, even the guys that I got in fights with and had arguments with, they would just ask me questions like, man, how is it that you're just so patient? Or how is it that you're just so unflappable? How is it that you're just kind of put together? Like, what's your secret? And in that moment, I was able to give an answer for the hope that I had. I was able to effortlessly share that I did have something in me that was larger than myself. And even though I had walked away from church, right, even though I wasn't really quite sure what I wanted to do with religion, there was still a faith there. It was really encouraging for all of the other stuff that I screwed up with, right? But I knew how to cultivate patience, and I knew how to listen, and I knew how to hear people, and I knew how to encourage people, and I wanted to do those things. And as it turns out, that was a more effective way of sharing a faith than any kind of carefully constructed argument. And so yeah, basic training. Now, when I was assigned to my first duty station, it was to work for one of the base newspapers. Went to Fort Knox and was a staff writer for the paper there. And I met some really great people, but some deeply flawed people. And as somebody who is deeply flawed myself, there was this strange camaraderie in it. Now, there were the people that were pretending to be all put together, just like there are in any place, right? But I tell you, there's something to be said for just living genuinely with people when you see their scars and imperfections and they see yours. But you saw people in their alcoholism, you saw people in their addictions, You saw people in their toxic relationships. You saw people in their patterns of self-destruction. And there was this tragedy to most people that went unspoken, expressed through maybe a knowing nod after a few drinks, but I just remember a lot of the people that were in my life, there was just a lot of hurt, and there really wasn't any way to fix it. And all of us were barreling toward our inevitable encounter with war, because that's the purpose of the military, right? It's not to bake cookies and march in parades, but it's to go and travel to some far-off country and bring death to people. I wasn't ready for some of the things I saw, and I don't think people can be. You see, I do believe in a creator, and I do believe that we are created beings, created in the image of a creator to create. I believe that that's our nature, is to build, write, sculpt, paint, compose, bake. It's to make things, even more of ourselves. But I find that war is so damaging to the psyche and soul because it's the antithesis of our purpose. It is the unmaking of creation. It is the destruction of created things. And you can get amped up on the high-octane adrenaline of it all. You can wave some flags to make yourself feel better about it. But at the end of the day, when you're alone with your dreams, it's haunting. And it's a stain that you can't just wash off anymore. And so it came to pass that it was my turn to go. It was my job to take pictures and write stories about what we were doing there. I happened to go to Iraq. It was a year deployment. We were stationed in a pretty big base just north of Baghdad, just on the northern outskirts of the city, called Camp Taji. And I was a part of a logistical unit, a logistical brigade. But I tell you, in the year that I spent in theater, spent a lot of time on the road, you know? Every bottle of water, bullet, piece of mail, spare part, all had to be delivered and shipped around, right? And so it was kind of like this intense militarized UPS FedEx adventure, you know? So I got to see a good chunk of the country, you know? And all sorts of missions with escorting trucks and being escorted, and it's weird, right? When you would leave the safety of the wire of your perimeter of your base and you load your weapons, and I was usually a passenger, even though sometimes I took on some kind of truck commander duties as an E5, as a sergeant, but I was a regular with some of these guys, and so I knew how to stay out of the way. I knew how to help. I knew how to get out and hook up vehicles in case something was disabled, or help respond to a situation whenever there was IEDs in the road and all of that kind of stuff. And when you're out there, you have this clarity of purpose, even if the mission is routine, because the danger is real. It has a tendency to bring all of existence into this moment. And I can see why people miss it. There's a weird, perverse aspect to it that does make you miss it. Elements of it. And I'm not a psychologist, but I do wonder if it's kind of in response to what seems to be like the banality of our existence. Being outraged about the way somebody phrased a question, or the fact that the Walmart service counter was open 10 minutes late, or that they forgot the side of fries with your food. That's what people focus their anger on this side of things. But over there was a higher calling, there was a higher purpose. But what was weird is that it wasn't a higher purpose, because what the hell were we doing over there? And so that came into play too, right? And it wasn't lost on most of us who were over there. So what are we doing, man? The kids are throwing rocks at you, and the women are screaming at you. It doesn't sound like fun things they're saying. And you're roughing up the guys, and you're forcing them through checkpoints, and you're catching some of them with explosive residue on their hands, and you're sending them off to get questioned. And it's disrupting families and people screaming and crying, and just, I'm over there just, right? So what are we doing? What are we doing? And so for all of the clarity that these situations potentially gave me as a person trying to find his way through the through the universe, it it wasn't altogether constructive either. I prayed a lot, and I was afraid a lot, and I was guilty a lot. And I spent a lot of time talking with the Iraqis when we were out in villages, and the Iraqis that had to endure all of the checks every day to come in to work on the base to earn a few bucks and then to go back home. And we did work a lot with the Iraqi army. We were training up Iraqi army units, and so we spent some battalions underneath my brigade spent some time on the Iraqi side of even our own base, trying to train up Iraqis to be in an army. And I tell you, the ones that stick out to me were the interpreters, the Iraqi interpreters. And they had to lie to their family about what they were doing, right? They'd come down from, Mosul, or they had come up from Baghdad, or maybe come from out west, maybe Ramadi or Fallujah or something like that. And they were working with the Americans being interpreters, but they had to lie to their family, one, because they didn't know if their family would turn them in and they would disappear if they ever went back home, or they didn't know if people would take reprisals against their family, so they had to lie about it. And even when they were out amongst the population, they always had to wear masks, and they always had to cover themselves up, because the going rate for an interpreter was about a year's salary for the average worker. And they had to go through so much effort to kind of hide who they were, because they believed in a better country for their families, even if people didn't like the Americans. But I remember being very humbled by people like these interpreters, who some of them had kids, and you would just ask, like, why are you doing it, man? There were some moments of just genuine humanity amidst it all, but it was just a lot. And after 52 weeks of Mondays, as we like to say, it was about time to come home. And coming home was also just so strange, especially as I was a single guy, right? No girlfriend, no boyfriend, no family close by, and our coming home, we had to keep it. The units had to keep it secret, because you didn't want that kind of operational knowledge leaking out. So it's not like they put a big announcement out for out-of-town family to come swooping in. So my family, who I know would have loved to have been there, they didn't know exactly when I was coming home. And they were in Oregon, right? I was stationed at Texas, so it couldn't just be a thing they could just hop in the car and go do. And so we came home, and we landed at Fort Hood, at the airport there at Fort Hood. And the flight to come home was about 25 hours. And you stop like 3 times. And they put you on the buses, and you've got your rucksack that you've had with you and your weapon, and they take you to the gym. And so the people who lived on the base, of course, knew the family members were coming home. And so the whole thing, like you've seen at the gym with the ceremony, and you're getting emotional, and you're just excited to be there, and you're at home, and the smells are different, and the trees are different, and the pavement and the roads, and you're just noticing it all, and you're not walking on gravel for the first time in like 8 months, and so everything's just weird. And you go charging in, and there's a ceremony, a very quick ceremony. You're standing in formation. It's that final tease with all the loved ones and the family members in the gym seats. The crying kids and the crying spouses and the crying soldiers, and they kind of give a quick little welcome home, rah speech kind of thing, and they release the soldiers, and everybody goes rushing into each other and hugs and kisses, and then people start clearing out, right? Because people going home, spending some time with some girlfriends and boyfriends and husbands and wives and kids and family, and the single soldiers kind of just hang around there as people are trickling out. And it's not like we were mistreated. It was just, all right, everybody, let's get on the bus. We're going to take you to your barracks, because we didn't have any place to stay, right? We didn't have any apartments that had been sitting around for a year, none of that stuff. All of our cars were even in storage, and so like our literal first night back, they took us to one of the barracks there on the base. So, and they kind of just dropped us off, and we had a formation, and people were kind of checked in, and they gave us like the army wool blankets and the sheets, and there was like a bag of welcome home stuff, with some deodorant and toiletries and a couple letters and really heartfelt stuff, really, really great stuff. I mean, not dogging that at all. It was really, really beautiful. And you're just kind of left alone for that first night back. And it was just so weird. The quiet. No generators. No helicopters. No drones flying overhead. It was just the sound of distant traffic on a highway, maybe, and nothing. And I remember standing out on like the third floor of this barracks, holding onto this railing, just kind of looking around at the street lights and at the aircraft avoidance lights on some of the towers in the distance, and just, I don't know. And I remember thanking God. I remember thanking him. And I remember asking him, like, well, now what? And I didn't sleep very well that night. And truth be told, I didn't sleep very well for the next 2 years. But that'll be for next time, our last part, because we gotta wrap this up. We gotta get to some other things, right? If you got anything out of this, I'd appreciate it if you could hit the like button. Maybe share it with a friend who went through something similar, who could hear just another voice